I'm going to show you how to make my reindeer slippers from Kreative Kiwi. For this I'm going to be using an 8x12 hoop for the sole, an 8x8 hoop for the upper, a 5x7 hoop for the antlers and a 4x4 hoop for the ears. You will need an 8x12 hoop to stitch this because of the sole. I've got a selection of threads, one with a matching bobbin, and that's for the satin stitch border around the sole and the upper. I've got some pins to secure my stabiliser, some masking tape, squizzers and my fabrics and batting cut to size, and I will talk about those as we go. So first off, load your neutral thread colour for the fabric that you're going to be using for the ears into your machine. Then we're going to hoop our 2 layers of wash away stabiliser, and I'm using a 4x4 hoop for this because the ears are the same size no matter which size slipper you're going to be making, and they go from sizes 4 to 8, so they're all adult sizes. So place your 2 layers of wash away stabiliser over the outer hoop, then insert your inside frame, and then we're going to pin around the top edge of the hoop. So take a needle with a pin, with a head on it, rest it on top of the inside frame, push it through your stabiliser, then bring it back round and through the stabiliser again, and that will anchor it. So you're going to do that on all 4 sides, and the larger your hoop as we go through, the more pins you will use around the edge to stop it from moving. You're now going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your placement outline for your fabrics. We're now going to place our fabric down for the front of the ears. Now if you're using a fabric such as velvet, faux, velveteen, anything like that, anything that's got a pile, you're going to need to add some solvay on top, and this is like a thin plastic wash away stabiliser. It's called a topper, and it goes over the top of anything that you don't want the stitching to sink into the pile. If you've got a direction to your pile as well, as I have with this velvet, make sure that you know which way it's running when you place your fabric down. So mine's running from top to bottom, and I'm going to place it over the outline with my pile running in the right direction. Then I'm going to place my solvay topper over the top and tape it in place. If you're using ordinary fabric, cotton or anything like that that doesn't have a pile, you don't need to worry about the topper, of course. We're now going to pop our hoop into our machine and stitch round number 2, and that's going to secure our fabric to the hoop, and it's also going to stitch the detail, the fill detail, inside the ear. We can now remove the solvay, and it will just tear off. Just tear around the edge of the stitch lines. We're now going to place our backing fabric, and you're going to put that face down over the top, but make sure that you've got your pile of your fabric running the right way if you've got one, and then just tape it in place. And you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3 to secure it. We can now free our ears from the hoop, and we're now going to trim around the edge of them, and we're going to leave 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and a little bit more at the bottom here, so when we join them to the upper there's enough to position it with. So just take your sharp scissors and cut around the edge. These are going to sit at an angle on the upper, so we're just going to cut those at a slight angle as well. And we're now going to snip notches into the towards the stitch line, so that when we turn it out the right way, the ears aren't too bulky and they curve nicely on the seam. So just snip around the edge. Take care not to cut your stitching, of course. And then you're going to do the same with the other one. And we're now going to turn them out the right way, and this is going to be a little bit fiddly, but persevere. I'm going to use a chopstick for this, and I'm just going to open this up, push my chopstick inside, and it's got a nice blunt end, and then I can push it through to get it started with my scissors, and I'm just pushing them onto the end of my chopstick, and then after that it's just a case of wiggling it through. I'm just going to push my scissors in just to push the seams out so that they will lie nice and flat. And that's my first ear complete. And I'm now going to do the same with the second one. And you can take your wash away stabiliser off if you want, I don't bother. And then push it in to get it going. Whoops. And take care, of course, not to push your scissors right through the seam. And then again push the seams out. And of course, if you want to, you can press them as well if you want. So that's our ears done, and we can set them aside for the minute. We're now going to do the antlers, so load your neutral thread into your machine for that. Then you're going to hoop and pin your 2 layers of wash away stabiliser, and I'm using a 5x7 hoop for this. Again, the antlers are the same size no matter which size of slippers that you're using, so you'll be able to use the 5x7 hoop. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your placement outline for your fabric. We're now going to place our fabrics, but I want to talk to you about the fabrics first. I advise you to use a stretchy fabric for your antlers because they're quite fiddly to turn out the right way, and if you've got a non-stretch fabric it's going to be quite difficult. I'm not saying that you can't, but it's a lot easier if you use a stretch fabric. So I'm using a stretch velour. So you're going to place your fabric over the outline, and this is your front fabric, then you're going to place your backing fabric face down over the top, and then you're going to tape it in place. And stretchy fabrics tend to curl, so just battle through it. You're now going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2, and that's going to secure both fabrics to the hoop. You can now free your antlers from the hoop. If you want to trim out this area here of the stabiliser, you can do. It's probably going to make it easier to turn the antlers if you do. So I'm going to trim mine out. But take care not to cut your stitches, of course. And it's easier to do it in the hoop than it is out, so. We're now going to cut these in two. I'm just going to snip up between the two, leaving equal amounts of fabric between them. Side for a second, and now we're going to trim around the edge of our stitch line, and you're going to leave again 1/4 of an inch as you did for the ears. We're now going to do the other antler. And then we're going to snip around the edges as we did for the ears. Now if you do catch your stitching, as I did here, all you need to do is just run it underneath your sewing machine and stitch it back up again. It's easy to do. So we're now going to snip around the edge. And this is the bit that you don't want to be cutting the stitches. And now you're going to do the same on the other one. I'm not going to demonstrate the other one because you get the idea. So once you've got both edges snipped, we're now going to turn these out the right way. So again, I'm going to be using a chopstick, and I'm going to insert it, and then I'm going to use something, anything. I'll use a cotton bud here, I had that to hand, just to turn it out the right way. And it's just to get it going, because once you've got it going, it's not too difficult. So that's our first one, and now we're going to do the second. I'm making it look really difficult because I can't really see what I'm doing properly, so it's not that bad. And that's our second antler done. I'm going to stuff the antlers now. You don't want to overstuff them, and you want to keep your stuffing out of the way of the opening as well. So we're going to take a bit of stuffing and just push it inside and work our way up each of the antler horns. Okay, so stuff it as if it was down to the opening, and then you're going to push this bit here right up inside, and once we've stitched the antlers to the slipper upper, we will then massage it down afterwards, so it's not going to interfere with the travel of our foot while it's stitching down. So that's nicely stuffed, and my stuffing comes to there, and there's my opening. So I've got at least an inch of space, and after it's stitched in place and we've freed the upper from the hoop, you just massage it down, and then there'll be enough to come right down to the opening. I'm just going to poke that back up inside for a minute, and you're going to do exactly the same with the second one, and I've already done that one. So we can now set the antlers aside for a minute. We now come to the third hooping, so load your file for the upper into your machine along with a neutral thread to your fabric. Then you're going to hoop and pin 2 layers of wash away stabiliser, making sure that you've got plenty of pins around the edge of the hoop because it's a larger hoop. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you a placement outline for your antlers and also for your batting. So we're now going to add the antlers, and these markers here are where we need to place them. So we're going to place the edge of this up against the edge of this, like so, and you want to make sure that where the stitching stops for the bottom, that it's over this stitch line. And then we're going to pin it in place. So I can't see properly, so and keep your pin right out of the way of the stitch line. And then we're going to add a piece of tape to the other side, and that's going to keep that under control. And now we're going to do the other one. It doesn't matter really which way round you add them, as long as they're added. And again, see where your stitching ends. And you can do a far better job than me. And pin it, making sure that you keep your pins out the way of the stitch line again. And then I'm going to add another piece of tape to hold the ends down. I'll probably fiddle with this in a minute before I stitch it down. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2, and it's going to secure the antlers with a runner stitching. When you stitch these down, make sure that your foot can clear over the top of your antler fabric. So you might have to go into your machine settings and raise your foot slightly to clear it. And you also want to make sure that your stitch speed is as slow as possible. We're now going to stitch round number 2. So remove your tape and check that you're happy with your join. Then we're just going to trim up some of the excess fabric here to remove some of the bulk. Take care not to cut too close to your stitching. You do need to leave a little bit of space. So I've just left about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on both. And then we're going to place our batting over the top and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3. Trim away the excess batting from around the edge of the stitch line, taking care of course not to cut your stitches. We're now going to place our fabric for the head on top of our batting. Make sure that you get the direction of the nap the right way, and then tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 4. Okay, what I should have said before you actually stitched your top fabric down is to place your solvay topper over the top if you've got a piled fabric. I forgot, I'm very sorry, so we're going to do it now before we stitch the face details onto him. So place it over the top and tape it in place. You're now going to load your white thread into your machine, and then we're going to stitch round number 5, and that's going to do the whites of the eyes. Load your thread colour for the black of the eyes and the mouth into your machine, and then stitch round number 6. Load your thread colour for the eyelids and the muzzle definition into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 7. Load your black thread back into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 8, and that's going to stitch the eyebrows and the definition outline around the eyes. So we now come to the ears, and we're going to join them one by one. I'm going to turn this around for a minute because I want to show you something. Now the ears you can put one of 2 ways. You can either have them this way round, in which case they will curve slightly upwards, or you can swap them over and they will curve slightly downwards if you want that morning after the night before look. And I think I'm going to go with that. It's a little bit of fun, isn't it? So to join your ear, and we're going to do the top one first, place it over the placement outline and then tape it in place. Now I'm going to put a second piece of tape on here just on this side so that it can't move. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 9, and that's going to secure it to your hoop. So trim off the excess fabric from this side of this stitch line. pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 10, and that's going to zigzag, then satin stitch the join. So we're now going to do the same at the bottom here. I'm just going to turn this around so I can see what I'm doing. So place it over the stitch line and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 11 to secure it. So we're now going to trim off the excess here. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 12, and that's going to zigzag and then do the satin stitching over the top. We now come to the nose, so place your fabric over the nose area, and I'm using scuba fabric because it's nice and stretchy because we're going to be stuffing it. You can use whatever you like, so tape your fabric in place, pop your hoop into your machine along with your thread colour for the nose, and then you're going to stitch round number 13. So through the opening that's been left in the stitching, take some hollow fibre or whatever stuffing you're going to be using. I'm just recycling an old cushion, and then pop it inside. And then just try and get your stuffing to stay this side of the stitch line, the nose stitch line. And then tape your fabric down. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 14, and that's going to close this area here. Trim away the excess fabric from around the edge of the stitch line, taking care not to cut the stitches, of course. Making sure you've got your thread colour for the satin stitching that's going to go around the edge of the nose loaded into your machine. You're now going to stitch round number 15, and that's going to zigzag the raw edge. Check that there's nothing poking through the zigzag stitching. If there is, trim it off, and then you're going to stitch round number 16, and that's going to do the satin stitching around the border of the nose. We now come to the backing, so turn your hoop over and place your backing fabric over the outline, and mine's a very thin fleece, and then you're going to tape it in place. We now have to fold the ears down, so bring them down over the eyes and tape them down, keeping your tape out of the way of the border. And do the same to the other ear. Before you stitch the next round, you're going to want to make sure that your foot is raised to at least 6 millimeters so that it clears the antlers and everything else that we've added in thickness to the hoop. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 17, and that's going to secure your backing fabric. We're now going to trim away the excess fabric from both back and front of the hoop, so turn your hoop over and trim around the edge, taking care of course not to cut your stitches. Turn your hoop over and do the same on the front. Making sure that you've got your matching bobbin and thread colour for the satin stitch border around the edge loaded into your machine. You're now going to stitch round number 18, and that's going to zigzag the raw edges. You might want to slow your machine down for these last few rounds. Check to make sure that you're happy with your zigzag stitching and there's nothing poking through. If there is, trim it off, and then you're going to stitch the final round of stitching, which is round number 19, and that's the satin stitch border. We're not going to be stitching round number 20, that is there purely to control the foot and keep it out of the way of your work once the satin stitching has finished. So that's the stitching completed. We can now free this from the hoop. I'm going to leave the tape on over the ears for a second just while I cut it out. And the other thing I've left on is the little tails from the tie-in and tie-off knots on the back, because they're an ideal marker for the centre of your toe, which you're going to need when you join the upper to the sole. So we're now going to free this from the hoop. So turn your hoop over and cut round the edge, and you can safely cut through these two markers as well. We're now going to massage the stuffing inside the antlers down. And to get it into the corners, just take a pin, poke it through the fabric, and then just pull the stuffing into the corners. And do the same on the other one. I'm now going to take off the tape from his eyes. And we can also remove the solvay topper as well. We're now going to dissolve the excess stabiliser from around the edge. The truth is, you can do this either now or you can do it afterwards. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to do it now. So take a cotton bud, dip it in some warm water and just run it along the edge. And that's your upper complete. I just want to talk quickly about my fabrics and what I've got here for the sole. I've got a very thin fleece, and I do advise you to use thinner fabrics for the lining. I've got my usual fleece 295 batting, Vilene 295 batting. I've got some vinyl for the sole for underneath the slipper, because it's quite non-slip, believe it or not, certainly more so than just plain fabric, so I do advise you to put something like that underneath. On the back of this I have ironed on some Vilene Decoville Heavy. Now that's a stiff bag interfacing. It's designed to be stitched through, so it's not going to hurt your machine in any way. There's also a Pellon equivalent called Pellon 526 FP Decoville. So that's going to stop our sole from flopping underneath the heel. And it just irons on like ordinary regular thermal interfacing. We now come to the final hooping, which is the sole. So hoop and pin your 2 layers of washaway stabiliser, load the sole file into your machine along with the matching bobbin and thread for the quilting on your slipper, and then you're going to stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your batting placement outline. I've lowered my foot for this round and the batting, but we will be raising it again afterwards. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2 to secure it. Trim away the excess batting from around the edge, and I do apologise in advance if I go out of shot. I haven't got a lot of space to manipulate my larger hoops under the camera. Place your lining fabric over the top of the batting and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3, and that's going to secure it. Next is the quilting over the sole. So make sure that you've got your thread colour loaded into your machine for that, and then you're going to stitch round number 4. We're now going to add the backing, which is actually the sole of the slipper. So turn your hoop over. Place your vinyl with the Decoville ironed onto the back over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 5, and that's going to secure it to the hoop. And I'm just going to put a little bit of tape each side of here because my fabric's curling up. We're now going to trim up both back and front of the hoop. I'm starting on the back as always, and I've already got my hoop turned. So take your scissors and trim away. Now do the same on the front. Making sure you've got a matching bobbin and thread loaded into your machine for the satin stitch border. You're now going to stitch round number 6, and that's going to zigzag around the raw edges. Making sure that you've got your matching bobbin and thread loaded into your machine, you're now going to stitch round number 7, and that's going to do the satin stitch border around the sole. So now that the sole's completely stitched, we're now going to free this from the hoop. So turn your hoop over and trim around the edge of your stitch line, taking care of course not to cut your stitches. And that's the sole stitch, and you can see how relatively inflexible it's now become with that Decoville inside. So we're now going to align the top to the bottom, and we want to find the middle. So just fold your upper in half, pinch, and it's there. And if you leave the little threads on the back, you will have a marker already in place, and you'll be able to feel the centre of the sole because all the starts and stop knots were done at the very tip. So we're now going to align these. It's a bit awkward because it's it's a bit big. And I'm just going to put some clips to hold it all in place. And just you're going to sit one stitch line on top of the other all the way around until you run out of upper. And then we're going to do the same the other side. Do the same with your other slipper as well, and then you're going to stitch them on your sewing machine to join the two together. And you're going to start at the middle of the toe and work round, and then when you get to the end, back tack a few times over where the two meet here, and then start again in the middle, go round and back tack again this side, and that will make sure that you've got a nice sturdy join to your upper. And if you wanted to, if you find the clips an annoyance, you can baste the top onto the bottom and then it's not going to move for sure while you're stitching. I'm just going to give you one more little tip before we go. Stitch over the top of the centre stitch line on the satin stitch and just follow that. And if you use an invisible thread as well, such as monofilament, then nobody's going to see it even if you did go a little bit wobbly. Just take your time and work your way around slowly. So let's go to the sewing machine now. And that's our slipper complete. All you need to do now is stitch one more, and provision has been made to have a mirror image of the top, or you can do two the same. It's entirely up to you. Once your foot's in, your antlers will hold up on their own. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this stitch along. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified of new videos as soon as they're published. Do pop along to Kreative Kiwi's Facebook group. There's always lots of ideas, help and inspiration there for everybody. And thank you very much for joining me. You'll find a link to this design in the video description below, along with lots of other information such as where I get my supplies and some discount codes for you as well. Merry Christmas!